All right, shalom, shalom, and shalom. You are live and direct once again with your Akazaki Yahoo. And I start this broadcast as I would start any broadcast by first of all giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who were scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed. I'm joined this evening by my most esteemed Akinanaya. Shalom, Aki.
Hey, shalom, shalom, Aki. Shalom, Yasharal. Call halal Yahweh. Bahashem, Hamashiach, Wa Malak, Yahweh Shah, Barakatham.
Hallelujah. Yes, indeed. All praises to Yahweh in the name of his beloved Son, the Messiah, Yahweh Shah, and King. Bless you. Hallelujah. Praises to the Father. We are back again with another video review. Thanks to our good brothers over at Black Journals and also our brothers over at Black Culture Unlocked. We're going to start with our brother Louis Farrakhan and the Black Journals video. We're going to jump right into that. It's always a pleasure watching the elder work and do the great work he likes to do. So let's get to it. You know, I wondered when the last time he did something like live, because I don't know if he's done anything recently. You know, I know he's up like what 90 now, ain't he?
Yeah, we just looked at that, man, sometime last year. Well, sometime ago, a few months ago, we looked at his age, and I want to say it was 90 or 91 or something like that.
Yeah, so I'm sure he slowed down considerably, but man, I would love to hear him do something live or something like that. So but let's go ahead and get to it, and all praises to the Most High. Here we go.
O.J. Simpson was charged with murder. And in a court of law with a jury of his peers, he was set free. A lot of folk didn't like that, so they sued him. And he lost in court because even though he was not convicted of murder, they said he's responsible. White folk are rich and powerful, the rich and powerful, because black folk worked for 310 years as chattel slaves and got not one day's pay. I could call out the rich and the powerful whose riches have been gotten on our backs, but I'll save that for another time. The point is, the present generation of whites did not do this, but the present generation of whites are in their privileged position because of what a former generation of whites have done. Now the question is, a black agenda should be put before them, because if they don't accept the responsibility to clean up this problem, you don't have a lot of time to wait 40 more years for a benevolent white president or a benevolent black president. That day is over. America is facing the judgment of God as we sit around this table. Look at the weather. Look at the world turning down on her. America is bankrupt. $13 trillion in debt And if you figure Medicare and Medicaid, she's over $60 trillion in debt. She can never pay it. That's why she voted for $650 billion in armament, because she can't pay the debt. But she can bully those whom she is in debt to with fear over her military prowess. I'm here to tell you she's losing there too.
The truth of his expression, the passion of his truth, and the knowledge accumulated from the sorrows of his experience resonates only with one signature: controversy. Yes, it all resonates with an unapologetic candor that has sparked both admiration and outrage.
CNN, I was questioned after I spoke in 2007 about Barack Obama. And CNN said, well, what do you think about this young man? I said, I think he's brilliant. I think he has fresh ideas. But I'm under no illusion that even if he did become president, that he could change the reality of Black suffering in America. Because when you are running for something, you can say a lot of things. But when you sit in the seat and you feel the energy of electricity putting something on your backside, the forces that surround power is always the real power. President Obama does not run this country. President Obama has been chosen to govern white affairs. And if in that process we get something, it won't be because the governing powers want it. It will be because we organized and forced a government to speak to our needs.
This was 14 years ago in a Black forum on the way forward for the Black community in America. And all what Minister Farrakhan had to say concerning Obama as a Black brother and the president at the time was flinty as was, in fact, unhypocritical.
Our people need repair. Yes. We need repair from 310 years of chattel slavery, where Black men were forced to be studs, to make Black women pregnant, to make more slaves for the slave master. And that same unhealthy attitude of misusing our women and making babies that we have no desire to take care of is still with us. Willie Lynch, who gave the ways that we could keep being divided so that they could rule us for 1,000 years. That sickness is still with us. Yes, we got a Black president, but brother said it was confusion. He confused the issue. But really, he never wants to lose the white vote. So if he loses the white vote, he don't care that you voted for him. But if he loses the white vote, he feels he will lose. Dear brother, if you're watching, out of love,
That's right.
you won't lose the white vote of those whites that really understand this problem and know that this problem needs to be solved, and we can't keep relegating it to generation after generation because a few of us got a little money, a few of us got positions, a few of us have wealth, while the masses of our people are going steadily down. No
Right
one
on.
man can rise above the condition of his people. So, President Obama, this august body of brothers and sisters that really love you want you to use your bully pulpit, but then after you do that, then what about us? See, brother said responsibility. Is it that we should let them take responsibility to do for us, or should we pool the knowledge that's at the table, the power that's in our community, the wealth that's in our community to change the harsh reality of Black life in America? He can create an atmosphere, but we have to do the job of fulfilling the Black agenda.
Right in the event of this year, 2010, Farrakhan, in the Black Forum being held at the time, hinted ironically on the need for Blacks to recognize the political chess being played by having a Black president elected in the White House.
I want it clearly said in love that I love my brother. I voted for him. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I was out there with my wife voting for our brother. I, like you, am very proud that a Black man sits in the White House.
Oh. Yeah.
But I also understand very clearly, and we should understand that it is the White House.
The man also hinted at Blacks recognizing the necessity to consciously push the Black agenda instead of expecting that from a Black elected president run by white.
And until we exercise power to force that house to address our agenda. Now remember, our dear sister Julianne Malvo mentioned A. Philip Randolph. Man, that was long time ago. And the cry was jobs and justice. In the March on Washington in 1963, the cry was jobs and justice. In the 20-year anniversary of the March on Washington, the cry was jobs and justice. We are now in 2010. And what is the cry? Jobs and justice. Well, wait a minute. How long? President Obama does not run this country. President Obama has been chosen to govern white affairs.
Farrakhan's message is not limited to Black empowerment alone. He is also an outspoken critic of systemic racism and oppression, calling out leaders and institutions that have failed to address the concerns of Blacks. As the leader of the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan's words have been both a balm to some and a poison to others. Farrakhan's journey has always been marked by a quest for identity, justice, and truth.
The first thing I want to talk to you about is who you are. So you'll have greater expectation. Jesus said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. If somebody can make you think you are nothing, how do you act? Like you think. So the skill of the slave master, if I can get my my slave to think he's nothing and I'm everything, then he'll look to me and not to himself. And if you look at us, we don't think much of ourselves. Why? Because we don't really know who we are, therefore you don't know what to expect of yourself. When you're robbed of your history,
Wow, that's some audio interference, but they put the caption up. So,
From his early days as a calypso singer to his eventual rise as the national spokesman for the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan's voice has been a clarion call for Black empowerment and self-determination. Farrakhan's message is rooted in a deep understanding of the historical struggles faced by Black people in America. He recalls the brutal legacy of slavery, segregation, and how these injustices have been perpetuated by those in power.
where there is freedom, where there is justice, where there is equality, there is love and there is life. Our problem is we have been looking to the wrong source to give us freedom, justice, equality, love, and life.
His words are not just a lamentation of past wrongs. They are a call to action, urging Black people to take control of their own destiny and forge a brighter future.
Are you gonna sit around begging white people to do for us what we have the power to do for ourselves? Excuse me. I'm quite passionate, so you all set me off. You know that. And I love it. But listen, an agenda is a program, a schedule, a timetable, a plan, a list, a scheme to accomplish a certain result. We have come up with Black agendas, but we've been looking to the wrong people to fulfill our agenda. If Franklin Delano Roosevelt said to A. Philip Randolph, yeah, everything you told me is right. The Negroes need this, the Negroes are suffering that. Now you go out and make me do it. Do you think that having a Black face in the White House means that we don't have to make him do it?
That's right.
That's right. Who surrounds him?
He advocates for economic empowerment, self-sufficiency, and community development, emphasizing the need for African Americans to support and uplift one another. Farrakhan, in the light of his words, would go so far as to identify the substantiality of Blackness, making the Black man and woman to see just why they should never hate themselves.
That the Caucasian race is not natural to the planet. And wait. This is not hate. I want you to reason with me. All of you religious people, preachers, teachers, listen. There's nowhere on the earth that Caucasians say they're natives. Why? He's not a Native American. He's not a native in South America. He's not a native in the Caribbean. He's not a native African. Talk to me. He's not a native in the Middle East. He's not a native Asian. Well, where is he native? You could say he's a native European, but he's not even a native there. Now, if he's not a native anywhere on the earth, then he's not the natural man. Then how did he get here? Black and white. We have to end this problem. It taught us he got here through a system of birth control, killing the darker, saving the lighter, marrying the lighter on to the lighter, killing the darker, saving the lighter, marrying the lighter on to the lighter, until we produce race. Race has a beginning. And if you got a race that has a beginning, all race has an ending. You are not a race. You never were a race. God don't produce a race. God is the beginning. God is the ending. I am Omega. I am the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord.
Ultimately, the legacy of Louis Farrakhan is a tangled web of truth, controversy, and passion.
What does he mean? How dare you take your national origin from some piece of land and you call that piece of land by any name that you call it, and then name your nationality after such? Where did you originate from? Allah says in the Quran, I created you from a single essence, and your mate of the same kind. And from these two, I spread many men and women. God speaking, I made you into tribes and families, that you may know one another and not despise one another.
Love him or hate him, the man's impact on American history and the struggle for Black liberation cannot be denied.
So if my origin is from God, then you are my brother and my sister in the deepest sense of the word. Not from the same womb of my physical mother or the loins of my physical father, but we come out of the mind of the Creator himself. That's the womb that we came out of. So naturally, there's a bond between us if we can take away the rubbish of the world's philosophies and ideologies that have divided us. We can get to the real human being, the real divinity of the human being, and then raise it from a dead level and make it active, that we then can find peace on earth, and the kingdom of God will be established on earth.
Over the years, the individualistic and unconventional speeches of the minister have attracted a range of politicians and other public figures, as that spark of fire from his words has never failed to ignite the search of truths unaddressed.
The Bible and Quran talk to us, particularly the Quran, about the hereafter. Where is it? You look at the words, here, after. Here is an adverb of place. After is an adverb of time. Here where? Here on this earth. After what? After the destruction of an evil way of civilization, you will find the hereafter right here on the earth. Again, the hereafter is here. After falsehood has been destroyed in your mind, the kingdom of God can come forth out of you. And that's why Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you.
With his speeches, he draws thousands of attendees, which gives him the dubious distinction of being quite possibly America's most popular anti-Semite.
Now, if that is so, and it is, the disciples asked Jesus, Master, teach us how to pray. All right. And he said, pray on this wise. Our Father, not yours and not mine. Not mine and not yours. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Not my name. Thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. So what the enemy has done is made us think off the planet so they could get control of the planet. And they have been successful because we have let the earth go in hopes of a better life somewhere else, and nobody who has gone there has ever come back to tell us how sweet it is on the other side. Once you wake up and know that the hereafter is here.
As a prophet, a leader, and a lightning rod, Farrakhan's name will continue to echo through the corridors of time, sparking debate, reflection, and transformation. That brings us to the end of yet another heartwarming video. Consider supporting us by hitting the thumb button to support our works. Like and share to every possible one you can to ensure the reform that we champion. Also, consider subscribing to stay tuned in with us if you are yet to. We are glad to.
All right, all praises to the Most High. As always, links in the description box. If you want to check out the video on Black Journals, subscribe to Black Journals. We definitely support Black Journals and the work that they do. Man, interesting stuff. I think this is some stuff I hadn't heard before from Elder Louis Farrakhan. Interesting. I know he's got a vast body of work, and a lot of information has come forth from this elder. But I think this is something I haven't heard. I don't remember him talking about that. How we were taken off of the thinking about the to wonder about heaven and not being concerned with the earth. And I think that's a very valid point that he made in that situation. I hadn't heard him make that before, which tells me there's probably a lot that he has that I haven't seen, and a lot more that I should be studying. So interesting information, and always good to hear from Elder Louis Farrakhan. So I'll yield there. Go ahead, Doc.
Indeed, the elder makes some really good points regarding how we treat one another. And I definitely agree with him. We shouldn't be looking to other people to fix things for us. This ought to be something that's done internally, because these issues affect us. He's been a light for his people. Do we agree with everything that that stands for? I would say no. I would venture to say no. I'm not privy to all of his work. I would also be privy. I would also believe that there's going to be a lot that we probably do agree upon. But one thing I can say is that is probably one of the freest, Negroes walking the earth.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. I completely agree with you on that, because he don't mix any words. He say exactly what he needs to say, and you know it's ironic because we see that, and of course, my mind jumps to wisdom. Wisdom teaches us a fool uttereth his whole mind,
Mm-hmm.
but a wise man save some for later, or not to speak while until you've heard the whole matter, things of that nature. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I know he's well versed. Not only is he able to speak uh, with great ability, but he's also able to address the issues and really draw a picture for you with his words. I mean, it's absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
His ability, and that didn't just come from hanging out, and that's years of wisdom that he's able to do those things. So, but praises to the Abba. So always thankful for a new video. I'm gonna have to look and see if we can find some more information. I think we're gonna have to dig a little bit deeper. These have been coming out in bits and pieces, and I want to be mindful because the last time we did a video, we got flagged. That wasn't from Black journals or something like that. We got flagged, but at the same time, we got to be mindful that we get this information and utilize it properly. So we're gonna jump to the next video. This is from our brothers over at Black Culture Unlocked. This is the Colfax Massacre, 1873, that they don't want you to know about. So thinking about at the beginning of this, what do you know about the Colfax Massacre? What can you recall about that? Did they talk about this when you was in high school? Did you read about this in Black history in college? Because I did not. I haven't heard anything about it. So let's get to it here.
Town somewhere in Louisiana. Imagine a quiet town somewhere in Louisiana in the spring of 1873. The warm sun casts long shadows over the rolling hills with a chilly atmosphere, and the Colfax Courthouse stands as a pillar of hope for a community that's eager to redefine its future. But instead of hope, that spring would bring unimaginable tragedy, a day filled with bloodshed that would expose the depth of racial prejudice and political tensions in post-Civil War America. This is the story of a harrowing episode that left over 100 Black men dead, forever etching its name into the annals of American history as one of the darkest moments of Reconstruction. This is the story of the Colfax Massacre. The Colfax Massacre is not just a story of violence and loss, but one of power, resistance, and the lengths to which some were willing to go just to maintain a racial hierarchy. This event occurred during a period when the country was struggling with the aftermath of the Civil War. They were trying to rebuild its physical infrastructure and also its social and political fabric. The massacre was not an isolated incident, but a grim reflection of the hostility and violence that was posed against Black Americans in pursuit of equality and participation in the democratic process. You may be asking, why does this story matter? Because it exposes how fragile democracy is when met with systemic racism and unchecked violence. The Colfax Massacre reminds us of the extent some societies were willing to truncate the progress that was made during the Reconstruction era. This narrative shows that freedom came at a very high price for Black Americans, and the enduring struggle for justice and equality that is still felt today. In this video, we will dive into the depth of the events that led to the massacre, the horrifying violence that played out, and the lasting consequences that influenced American history. The broader context of Reconstruction was a period filled with promise yet marred by conflict. The Reconstruction era was a time of great hope for many, especially the Black population that was newly set free. The United States promised a new era of liberty and equality with the abolition of slavery and the passage of the 13th 14th, and 15th Amendments. But these promises saw an extremely fierce resistance from those who refused to abandon the old order. In Louisiana, similar to many southern states, the battle for power became a violent struggle, where Black Americans often bore the consequences of the violence. Colfax was a small town in Grant Parish, Louisiana, which became the focal point of this struggle. It was here that tensions over a contested gubernatorial election and local political disputes reached a boiling point. Black citizens became eager to protect their hard-won rights and assert their role in governance. They took a stand by occupying the Colfax courthouse. Their courage attracted brutal opposition from white supremacist militias, who saw their actions as a threat to the established social order. On April 13, 1873, the standoff at the courthouse culminated in an orgy of violence that shocked the nation. Armed white militias launched a strategic attack on the black defenders, overpowering them with superior firepower and larger numbers. What began as a siege turned into a massacre in a split second, with many black men being executed even after they had surrendered. The aftermath was so devastating as bodies were lying across the courthouse grounds, and the surviving black community was left under a terrible attack. Despite the intensity of the violence, justice was difficult to attain. The federal government's response to the massacre, or lack of response, exposed the extent of Reconstruction policies and set a dangerous footprint. The Supreme Court's eventual ruling in United States versus Cruikshank undermined federal efforts to protect black citizens, emboldening white supremacists, and setting the ground ready for the Jim Crow era. Before we proceed further to unravel the story of the Colfax Massacre, we will first expose the uncomfortable truths about America's past and reflect on its consequences today. Stay with us. Let's uncover the tragic events of 1873 and the lessons they hold for our collective future. The period after the Civil War, known as Reconstruction, was a time of monumental change and unrelenting tension. The Reconstruction era began in 1865, immediately after the end of the Civil War. It was a time when the United States was reeling from the devastation of war and sought to rebuild itself not just physically, but also socially and politically. The intent of this effort was the integration of millions of newly freed black individuals into American society as equal citizens. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th granted citizenship to anyone born in the United States, and the 15th ensured that race could not be used as a barrier to voting. For Black Americans, Reconstruction stood as a beacon of hope. Some schools and churches flourished in black communities, and many former slaves leveraged their newfound rights to vote, run for office, and own land. These gains were met with violent opposition from many white Southerners who perceived these changes as a major threat to their social and economic dominance. Those who stuck to the racist ideologies of the pre-Civil War South could not tolerate the very idea of Black Americans participating in governance. Louisiana, having a unique cultural and political history, became a major benefactor of the Reconstruction conflict. The state's economy, which was heavily reliant on agriculture and enslaved labor before the war, was in shambles. The political landscape was equally fraught with Republicans, many of whom were black or allied with black voters facing off against Democrats determined to restore white supremacy. In 1872, Louisiana's gubernatorial election became a point of ignition for these tensions. Both the Republican and Democratic candidates claimed victory, which led to a bitter struggle for power that became consequential across the state. This contested election became a representation of the broader national struggle over the future of Reconstruction and the rights of Black Americans. Grant Parish, a city where the town of Colfax is located, was created during the Reconstruction era to provide a political foothold for newly freed black voters. It was a majority black parish, and its local government was dominated by Republicans. However, this political control wasn't without its challenges. White supremacist groups like the White League and the Ku Klux Klan intended to intimidate black voters and destabilize Republican governance through violence and terror. The Reconstruction era experienced the emergence of paramilitary groups that used violence as a tool to suppress Black political participation. The Ku Klux Klan, which was established in 1865, was perhaps the most infamous of these groups, but others like the White League were equally deadly. These militias consisted largely of former Confederate soldiers and other white Southerners who believed they were fighting to preserve their way of life. In Louisiana, these groups operated with near impunity while targeting Black communities and Republican officials. Their methods included assassinations, lynchings, and armed raids. Local law enforcement agencies, often sympathetic to their cause, did very little to intervene. The federal government's efforts to fight against these groups through legislation like the Enforcement Acts were frequently undermined by lackluster enforcement and judicial resistance. In 1873, tensions in Colfax had escalated, reaching a boiling point. The contested gubernatorial election left the community deeply divided, with both Republican and Democratic factions claiming control of local offices. Black residents who were determined to protect their political interests rallied around the Republican government, even as white supremacists prepared to challenge their authority. The Colfax courthouse became a symbol of this struggle. Black citizens who were afraid of violence took up arms and occupied the courthouse, hoping to defend their rights and their community. Meanwhile, white militias began to assemble, planning their actions under the pretense of making an effort to restore order, but in reality, intending to reassert white dominance. What unfolded in Colfax was not an isolated incident, but an intentionally planned act that was part of a broader pattern of racial violence during the Reconstruction era. It was a testament to the lengths to which some were willing to go to maintain a system of racial oppression. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave a lasting scar on the nation's history. While trying to understand the historical context of the Colfax massacre, we see how the promises of Reconstruction were met with both hope and hostility. This era was a time when the nation could have moved toward greater equality and justice, but instead allowed violence and prejudice to restrict those ideals. The events that led to the Colfax massacre were deeply rooted in the political tensions of Louisiana during the Reconstruction era. The gubernatorial election of 1872 in Louisiana served as a flashpoint. In this highly contentious race, the Republican candidate, William Pitt Kellogg, and the Democrat, John McEnery, both claimed victory. The election results were marred by widespread accusations of fraud, intimidation of voters, and manipulation from both parties. Federal authorities ultimately recognized Kellogg as the legitimate governor. This was a decision that infuriated white Democrats who perceived Reconstruction policies as an imposition of Northern control over Southern states. At the local level in Grant Parish, where Colfax was located, the political atmosphere was even more volatile. The creation of Grant Parish itself in 1869 as a new parish carved out of neighboring ones was originally designed to empower the area's increasing Black population, many of whom were newly enfranchised. By 1872, this demographic shift had resulted in the election of Republican officials to local offices, of which many of them were Black. This newfound political power among Black citizens was a direct challenge to the traditional dominance of white Democrats, who refused to accept this dramatic change in the social order. To make it even worse, both Republican and Democratic factions claimed control of local offices after the disputed 1872 election. Two rival governments were formed in Grant Parish, with each side accusing the other of not being legit. Tensions between the factions became more intense as they contended for control over the courthouse in Colfax, which symbolized authority in the parish. For Black citizens, having control of the courthouse was seen as crucial to preserving their political gains. Conversely, white Democrats perceived its capture as essential to restoring what they considered the natural racial and political hierarchy. As the disputes over local offices lasted, the breakdown of law and order in Grant Parish became increasingly obvious. The lack of a clear governing authority created a power vacuum that aggravated the existing tensions. Rumors of violence and retribution began to spread on both sides, creating a cycle of fear and mistrust. Black residents who were aware of the history of white violence against their communities began to organize to defend themselves. Meanwhile, white Democrats in the area turned to paramilitary groups like the White League to assert their dominance through intimidation and force. During the early 1873, the situation in Colfax had gotten to a peak. Both Republican and Democratic factions armed themselves, and random acts of violence and intimidation became a norm. White militia, who were backed by the tacit support of local Democratic leaders and the broader white community, began to mobilize in earnest. For black citizens who had seen federal troops withdrawn from much of Louisiana, the looming threat of unchecked white violence was both terrifying and also familiar. In March 1873, black citizens who became afraid that their elected officials would be forcibly removed from office decided to take a stand. Under the leadership of William Ward, a black militia captain and Union Army veteran occupied the Colfax courthouse. This move was a defensive measure and a statement of resistance against the escalating attempts by white Democrats to undermine their political rights. The courthouse became a strengthened refuge, with black residents constructing barricades and stockpiling weapons to defend it. Families from surrounding areas sought shelter within its walls, believing it to be the safest place in the face of rising hostilities. For many, the courthouse symbolized the fragile hope of Reconstruction and the possibility of a future free from white domination. White Democrats, however, perceived the occupation of the courthouse as an intolerable provocation. They painted it as an unlawful rebellion that needed to be crushed to restore order in the parish. This narrative conveniently ignored the fact that the black community's actions were a direct response to the systematic violence and disenfranchisement they suffered. As news of the courthouse occupation spread widely, white supremacist militias from neighboring parishes began to converge on Colfax. These groups were composed of former Confederate soldiers, members of the Ku Klux Klan, and local men who were motivated by a desire to reassert white control. They were heavily armed with access to rifles, pistols, and even small cannons. Many of them carried a deep-rooted hatred for Reconstruction policies and were determined to destroy any atom of resemblance of black political power. White leaders like Christopher Columbus Nash, who was a former Confederate officer and a leading Democratic figure in Grant Parish, played a pivotal role in organizing the militia. Nash and his allies issued calls to arms, rallying white men to join their cause under the pretense of restoring law and order. The militia's true intent, however, was to terrorize and subjugate the black population of Colfax. A couple of weeks before the massacre, white militias began to surround the courthouse, cutting off supplies and communication. They issued ultimatums demanding that the black defenders surrender and vacate the premises. These ultimatums were accompanied by threats of violence, which only aggravated the resilience of the black community to resist. Despite their determination, the defenders faced overwhelming opposition. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with limited access to reinforcements or external support. The days leading up to April 13, 1873, were marked by an intensive sense of inevitability. Both parties are prepared for a confrontation that looks unavoidable. For the black defenders, the courthouse was not just a building, but a blast stand against the forces that sought to strip them of their hard-won rights and freedoms. For the white militias, the courthouse represented a threat to their perceived superiority and a challenge to their dominance. On the eve of the massacre, white militias received reinforcements from neighboring areas which increased their ranks to an estimated 300 men. They prepared for an all-out assault while armed with superior firepower and driven by a shared sense of racial animosity. The black defenders, having some around 150, knew they were largely outmatched, but remained resolute. Their courage in the face of such overwhelming odds was a testament to their determination to fight for their rights and their community. In a final bid to avoid bloodshed, some black leaders attempted to negotiate with the white militias. These efforts were but to no avail, as the white leaders saw no need to compromise. The stage was set for one of the most horrific acts of racial violence in American history. What began as a struggle for political power in a small Louisiana parish would soon become a bloody reminder of how far white supremacists would go to maintain their power status. The events leading to the Colfax massacre were a tragic culmination of the deep-seated racial and political disparity that defined the Reconstruction era. They underscored the fragility of Black progress in the face of relentless white opposition and highlighted the failure of federal authorities to protect the rights of newly enfranchised citizens. As the sun rose on April 13, 1873, the Black defenders of the Colfax courthouse stood defiant, unaware that the day would end in unimaginable bloodshed and suffering. April 13, 1873, the day of the bloodshed. As dawn broke on the morning of April 13, 1873, Colfax was already bubbling with tension. Black residents, having taken control of the courthouse weeks earlier, remained solid in their belief that defending the building was the only way to secure their newly earned political rights. The courthouse, being a modest wooden structure, had become a refuge for over 150 Black men who understood the danger they experienced. They barricaded windows and fortified entrances and armed themselves with rifles, shotguns, and anything they could find. Many knew that the courthouse was not just a building, but a symbol of their hard-won freedom and the fight for representation. On the other side of town, white supremacists were actively preparing for war. The White League former Confederate soldiers and other groups had mobilized under the guise of restoring law and order. In the actual sense, they were driven by a desire to destroy the political power of Black citizens and to reclaim white dominance in Grant Parish. Eyewitnesses later recalled seeing a group of over 300 armed white men that was led by Christopher Columbus Nash, moving towards the courthouse with a chilling sense of determination. They carried rifles, pistols, and even a small cannon, prepared to unleash a torrent of violence. The attackers arrived outside the courthouse in the late morning. What began as a standoff quickly turned into an all-out siege. Nash demanded that the Black defenders surrender the courthouse, but the men inside refused, for fear of their lives and the lives of their families. The refusal got the mobs angry, and the first shots rang out, marking the start of one of the darkest days in American history. For hours, the attackers fired relentlessly at the courthouse, trying to weaken the determination of its defenders. The Black men inside returned fire, with the determination to hold their ground. The scene was chaotic, with smoke and gunfire filling the air. According to some survivors, the attackers employed military standard tactics, surrounding the courthouse and systematically cutting off any potential escape routes. By midday, the mob intensified their assault, setting fire to the courthouse in an attempt to lure the defenders out. Thick black smoke covered everywhere from the building as flames consumed its wooden frame. The defenders began to choke on smoke and, facing the unbearable heat, were forced to make a harrowing decision between staying inside and facing certain death or flee and risk being gunned down by the mob waiting outside. As the flames engulfed the courthouse, many of the defenders attempted to surrender by waving white flags and pleading for mercy. But mercy was not found that day. Eyewitness accounts reveal the horrifying extent of the massacre. Black men who emerged from the burning building were shot on the spot, while others were captured and executed in cold blood. Who would have thought that very day would be their last? One survivor, who managed to escape by hiding in a nearby swamp, later recounted the chilling scene. In his words, "They shot them down like dogs," he said. Men with their hands up, begging for their lives, were slaughtered without hesitation. The violence extended beyond the courthouse. Some Black defenders tried to flee into the woods that surrounded the area, hoping to escape the mob's attack. But the attackers went after them, hunting them down like prey. Some survivors described the scenes of unimaginable brutality, men being tied up and executed, bodies left to rot in the open as a warning to others. By the time the violence subsided, the death toll was so severe. While the exact numbers aren't precise, historians estimate that between 60 and 150 Black men were killed that day, many of them after they had surrendered. In contrast, only 3 white attackers lost their lives. This is a stark testament to the one-sided nature of the violence. The massacre left the Black community of Colfax utterly devastated. Homes were burned, families were torn apart, and a chilling message was sent to Black Americans across the South. Their lives and rights were of no essence in the eyes of white supremacists. The bodies of the slain were hurriedly buried in mass graves, their names and stories erased from the official record. The courthouse itself was burned down to ashes. This stood as a haunting reminder of the day when justice and humanity were abandoned in favor of hatred and violence. The horrifying events of April 13, 1873, created an enduring mark in the memories of those who survived. Their testimonies, passed down through generations, stand as a powerful reminder of the massacre's brutality. One survivor, an elderly Black man who had fought to defend the courthouse, described the hopelessness of the situation. "We knew we were outnumbered, but we believed we had to stand for what was right. When they set the fire, I thought it was the end. But I escaped into the woods and prayed to God to survive." Another account came from a white journalist who visited the site in the aftermath. He described the scene as a field of death, with bodies strewn across the ground and the stench of burning wood and flesh lingering in the air. His report was one of the few contemporary accounts of the massacre. While the attackers framed their actions as a necessary measure to restore order, their motivations were rooted in fear and hatred. The growing political power of Black citizens during Reconstruction was felt as an existential threat to the social and economic dominance of white Southerners. Groups like the White League saw the massacre as a victory, a chilling example of their willingness to use violence to maintain control. Weeks after the massacre, many of the attackers openly celebrated their actions, boasting about their role in suppressing what they falsely claimed was a Black uprising. This brazen attitude exemplifies the impunity with which white supremacists operated during Reconstruction. The Colfax massacre was not just a loss of life, but was an assault on the very ideals of democracy and equality. The Black men who lost their lives that day were not just victims of violence. They were martyrs in the struggle for civil rights and justice. Their sacrifice shows the extreme courage it took for Black Americans to fight for their rights in the face of overwhelming odds. The massacre had a significant impact on the families and communities left behind. Widows mourned their husbands, children grew up without fathers, and an entire generation of Black citizens was left to struggle with the trauma of that day. For the survivors, the memory of the massacre was a heavy burden, a reminder of both the cruelty they had endured and the resilience it took to rebuild their lives in the aftermath. Their stories are often silenced or ignored. This story stands as a true testament to the unyielding spirit of those who fought for freedom in the face of unimaginable adversity. The aftermath of the Colfax massacre went far beyond the immediate bloodshed and devastation in Grant Parish, Louisiana. It marked a turning point in the Reconstruction era, influencing the trajectory of civil rights in the United States and setting the footprint for decades of systemic racial oppression. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, the federal government's response was very loose. Despite the blatant and intense nature of the violence, federal officials were unable to bring the perpetrators to justice. The Reconstruction Acts and the Enforcement Acts of the early 1870s had provided mechanisms to fight against racial violence and suppress the activities of groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Yet these tools proved inadequate when applied to the events in Colfax. After the massacre, federal authorities initially arrested about 97 white men suspected of playing a role in the attack. However, local white communities rallied to protect the accused, employing methods like intimidation and legal maneuvers to overshadow the judicial process. In the deeply racist climate of the time, local juries who were more dominant with white men were unlikely to convict their peers for crimes against Black citizens. This left federal courts as the only plausible avenue for justice. In 1874, a grand jury indicted several individuals under the Enforcement Acts, specifically targeting violations of the civil rights of Black citizens. The defendants included members of the White League, a white supremacist militia that had orchestrated a major part of the violence. Prosecutors argued that the massacre represented a deliberate attempt to suppress black political power through terror and murder. Despite the clarity of the evidence, the trial faced significant challenges. The defense lawyers framed the case as an issue of state sovereignty, arguing that the federal government had no jurisdiction over what they deemed a local matter. This argument resonated with many white Americans who perceived Reconstruction-era federal interventions as overreach. After protracted legal battles, the case reached the climax in the Supreme Court decision United States versus Cruikshank in 1876. The Supreme Court's ruling in United States versus Cruikshank was a critical moment in the history of Reconstruction-era civil rights protections. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice Morrison Waite overturned the convictions of 3 men who were involved in the massacre, arguing that the federal government lacked the authority to prosecute individuals for civil rights violations unless the state itself was complicit. A narrow interpretation of federal power was that the court held that the 14th Amendment only prohibited actions by state governments, not private individuals or groups. As a result, crimes committed by private citizens, even those as vicious as the Colfax massacre, were deemed beyond the scope of federal enforcement unless explicitly sanctioned by state authorities. The decision significantly demoralized the enforcement acts, which had been enacted to curb racial violence and protect black voters. By limiting federal jurisdiction, the court effectively stripped the government of its ability to address the widespread racial terrorism that occurred throughout the South. This ruling reinforced the notion that civil rights protections were primarily the responsibility of individual states. In the post-Reconstruction South, where white supremacist governments controlled most state legislatures, this almost led to the abandonment of black citizens by the federal government. The Cruikshank decision intensified white supremacist groups across the South, sending a clear message that they could act with impunity. It also marked a critical turning point in the retreat from Reconstruction. This ruling paved the way for the rise of Jim Crow laws, institutionalized racial segregation, and the disenfranchisement of black Americans by undermining federal authority to enforce civil rights. The Colfax massacre and its legal aftermath exposed the federal government's diminutive commitment to Reconstruction ideals. In the early 1870s, the Grant administration had taken a relatively aggressive approach against white supremacist violence, deploying federal troops to suppress the Ku Klux Klan and enforce civil rights legislation. However, during the mid-1870s, political will for Reconstruction was rapidly wiped away. The economic depression of 1873, which is also known as the Panic of 1873, shifted national priorities away from civil rights and toward economic recovery. Northern politicians who were weary of the political costs of Reconstruction began to advocate for a policy of conciliation with Southern whites. This shift was further solidified by the Compromise of 1877, which ended federal military intervention in the South in exchange for the resolution of the contested 1876 presidential election. Southern states embarked on a systematic campaign to disenfranchise black voters and institutionalize racial segregation with federal troops withdrawn and Reconstruction policies effectively abandoned. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses became common tools for suppressing blacks from participating in politics. Simultaneously, segregation laws officially enacted racial hierarchies in every aspect of Southern life, from education to transportation. The Colfax massacre's legacy was also intertwined with the emergence of Jim Crow. The massacre demonstrated the lengths to which white supremacists would go to maintain power and the willingness of state and federal governments to tolerate such violence. The events in Colfax and their legal aftermath also had profound consequences for the broader struggle for civil rights in America. They highlighted the fragility of democracy in the face of racial violence and underscored the need for robust federal protections for minority rights. This was a lesson that would resonate in the 20th century civil rights movement. The failure to secure justice for the victims of the Colfax massacre stands as a warning about the dangers of prioritizing political expediency over moral principles. It demonstrated the implications of abandoning vulnerable populations to the mercy of hostile majorities and highlighted the importance of federal intervention in protecting civil rights. Its legacy also highlights the enduring challenges of racial reconciliation and justice in America. It exposes the long shadow cast by slavery and the systemic barriers to equality that persisted long after its abolition. The Colfax Massacre is one of the most outrageous yet undertaught events in the history of America. For so many decades, the details of the massacre were deliberately cut short or entirely erased from public discourse. This historical neglect was not done by accident, but a well-calculated effort by local and state officials, white supremacists, and sympathetic historians who sought to erase the truth about what happened on April 13, 1873. During the immediate aftermath of the massacre, local newspapers that were largely controlled by Democrats and white supremacist sympathizers framed the event as a race riot. This narrative implied that the violence was equally orchestrated by black citizens and white attackers, thereby hiding the premeditated slaughter that was carried out by the white militias. The term riot was used strategically to downplay the systematic targeting of black citizens and to shift blame onto the victims. This framing lasted for decades, influencing public understanding of the event. In Louisiana, state and local governments also contributed to this erasure by refusing to memorialize the massacre or include it in educational curricula. Public records about the incident were incomplete, and surviving black citizens were often too intimidated to speak openly about their experiences. The perpetrators were backed by the legal system's failure to prosecute them and celebrated their actions as a victory against Reconstruction efforts. This act reinforces the culture of silence. Even in academia, the Colfax massacre was widely overlooked. For a significant part of the 20th century, historians turned blind eyes or marginalized the event, often succumbing to the lost cause narrative that romanticized the Confederacy and demonized Reconstruction. This omission fostered ignorance about the intensity of the violence and its implications for racial justice in America. The rediscovery of the Colfax Massacre's history began with the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 1970s. Scholars dedicated those periods to uncovering the truths of racial violence during Reconstruction. They began to examine the event, framing it not as a riot but as a massacre. This was an act of racial terrorism. Among these scholars was historian Eric Foner, whose work on Reconstruction highlighted the massacre as a turning point in the federal government's retreat from enforcing civil rights. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, local activists and descendants of the massacre's victims started pushing for greater recognition of the event. They made efforts towards preserving the few remaining artifacts and oral histories tied to the massacre and organizing memorials to honor the victims. Despite these efforts, rigid resistance persisted, especially from those who viewed acknowledgement of the massacre as an attack on their ancestors or regional heritage. The introduction of digital archives and platforms has significantly helped in bringing the Colfax massacre to light. Social media campaigns, podcasts, and documentaries have increased awareness of this occurrence. This ensures that a new generation understands the event's historical significance. Organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative have included the massacre in their broader narratives of racial violence in America, connecting it to other atrocities like lynchings and the suppression of voting rights. The Colfax massacre is a lens through which we can see ongoing racial and political tensions in the United States. The massacre was a display of the lengths to which white supremacist groups would go to maintain their power and suppress blacks from participating in political activities. These dynamics still exist today as voter suppression, racially motivated violence, and systemic inequality continue to plague American society. The massacre also highlights the dangers of historical denial and the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths. By silencing history, society risks promoting the same injustices it seeks to overcome. One of the most powerful lessons from the Colfax massacre is how fragile democracy can be when justice is compromised. Reconstruction represented a moment of profound possibility, a time when the United States could have truly redefined itself as a multiracial democracy. Instead, the violent resistance displayed by the Colfax massacre revealed how deeply entrenched racism and inequality were. The narrative of the massacre serves as a caution about the consequences of failing to hold offenders accountable. When systems of justice are weaponized to protect the powerful and oppress the marginalized, democracy becomes weak and inconsequential. The events in Colfax demonstrate that progress is not linear, in the sense that rights can be gained and lost, depending on the vigilance and collective action of those who fight for equality. Today, efforts to honor the victims of the Colfax massacre keep on growing, though they remain controversial. Memorials and historical markers in Grant Parish now acknowledge the massacre, but the language used often reflects ongoing struggles over historical interpretation. While some markers explicitly name the event as a massacre, others still bluntly refer to it as a riot. Educators, activists, and descendants of the victims continue to push for comprehensive inclusion of the Colfax massacre in the curricula of history across the nation. They argue that having an understanding of an event like Colfax is essential for combating the roots of systemic racism in America. This includes teaching students about the bravery of the Black defenders who stood up for their rights, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In recent years, the massacre has also become a focal point for discussions about reparations and restorative justice. Advocates argue that acknowledging and addressing historical injustices like Colfax is necessary for building a more equitable future. Not only memorializing the victims, but also exposing and fighting against the systemic issues that promote racial disparities today. The Colfax Massacre of 1873 stands as one of the darkest chapters in American history. This tragic event resulted in the loss of over 150 Black lives, many of whom were brutally slaughtered even after surrendering. The courthouse, which had become a symbol of hope and resistance, turned into a site of unimaginable carnage. Honoring the victims of the Colfax Massacre means more than remembering their names, but committing to the principles they fought for. While we reflect on the legacy of the Colfax Massacre, the words of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. resonate profoundly. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The massacre's victims were normal people who dared to believe in a better future. Their courage and sacrifice remind us that the fight for justice is never easy, but it is always necessary.
Wow. You know, I wasn't joking when I said, I never heard about this particular thing, this particular incident. And, they teach it in schools, but yeah, they went directly to it. And that makes a lot of sense because, man, that's just crazy, that you would surrender and they would continue to murder you, so there's no surrender. There's no real surrender. They would continue to execute you. I mean, that's crazy. That's horrible. It's a horrible situation, a horrible circumstance, a horrible existence, and it just show you how they would do our people, in a situation like that. Like that's so outrageous to think about. And wow, I'd never heard of this situation. So it's man, yeah, it's devastating, honestly. But not surprising. But man, the details of it are horrific. And
Indeed.
yeah, I'm gonna rest there. Go ahead, Art.
So this situation or this incident occurred in 1873. Let's see. In 1864, which would have been 11 years before, there was the Fort Pillow massacre, which occurred in Fort Pillow is like West Tennessee, like Memphis area.
Right.
Similar to this situation, the Negro troops were trying to surrender to Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was one of the generals of the Confederate Army. He also became one of the founders of the Ku Klux Klan. But the Negroes that were trying to surrender were executed. What the Confederate soldiers did was said, "Save your bullets." So they used their bayonets to massacre them. And that's the image that I have with this situation as well. You know, I've been reading about it, and what the witnesses are saying is just horrific stories of gruesome deaths that our people succumb to. You know, I have to ask the question, what's wrong with us, because nobody has been brought to justice for this. You know, I guess one of the ways that they try to memorialize this is with a granite plaque, but these people have seemingly gotten away with murder. And you know, some accounts say 50, some accounts say 80. There's another account that says 150 Negro souls perished that day. Well, not just that day, but so they killed some of them during the day, and then the ones that they took prisoner, they executed them later on that evening. And you know, it's just, you know, 1873, what was going on with our people? You had Reconstruction going on. Our people had been out of chattel slavery for, you know, roughly not even 10 years, like 8 years out, you know, and they were trying to vote, and you know, the losers of that war didn't like that, and you know, this became a way to oppress our people. And like I said, it's crazy out, because you know, I haven't learned about this in school, and if they have it their way, we won't learn about these things.
Right.
You know, people will say that you and I are wrong for talking about this. What's wrong with y'all? Y'all are blessed. Y'all are fortunate. You all got good jobs. Y'all are, you know, living the American dream. But no, man, this is a nightmare. It's a nightmare that continues. It'd be one thing, if we were talking about these atrocities and they had stopped happening, but I can go to my news feed and read about some atrocities that just happened.
Exactly. Just the other day, just happening now. You know, all of these things. It's so outrageous. I mean, it's we should be so behind. I mean, it's not stopped. It's continued, and it exists right here, right now. And it's so unreal, to say the least. True. But and here's the crazy thing: it's none of it is surprising. Go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like it's something wrong with people not being outraged by all of this.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. You should be outraged. You should be like, what in the world is this? This is crazy. Like, what kind of existence is this? What does this say about us as men, as people in this society, who this is where we stem from? You know what I'm saying? Like, this happened to our people. You know what I'm saying? So here's the reality of any situation. If this happened has happened, or happens to our people, that means that it can happen to us.
Indeed.
That could be me in that situation. That could be anybody listening to this in that situation, and finding yourself on the negative end of it. You know what I'm saying?
I think yeah, I think it's naive for us to believe that it won't happen again.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Because if you don't learn from your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Doomed. So that's what we got to look forward to, is repeating things like this. So we certainly got to learn from it. And this yeah, I kind of wish we would have did this one first, because I probably would have felt better after listening to Farrakhan talk.
Right. Right. Gotta find something good to watch to go to
Yeah,
sleep to tonight, man.
I'm to bring you up, because this
Right.
is horrible, to man, good grief. But again, we this is a situation, this is reality, and we got to deal with reality. We can't fake it or
Right.
act like it's something that is not, you know. So yeah, uh, man, crazy. Yeah. So 150, and I know y'all people probably thinking it was 1873. So what? 2020, 2025. What you think gonna happen this year? How many uh how many black people got to get murdered before you start caring? You know what I'm saying? How many? It got to be a white militia. Wasn't it just a cat that drove over a bunch of people here just the other day?
Yeah, yeah, down in Louisiana, down in New Orleans.
Who you think he was driving over? You think he found a crowd of white folks to drive over? Yeah. Lie.
Well, I mean, I think it was some, but
But majority of people in New Orleans is Negroes.
yeah, and he was too.
It was a Negro that did it.
You kind.
So this is what it's leading to. Our people doing this against our people.
Yeah.
He might be.
Look in Chicago. Like how many of our people will fall by gun violence this year, and the perpetrator will be a brother, somebody that looks like them.
Right.
We're doing the job of the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we've been trained to. We've been trained to hate ourselves. We've been trained to hate each other. And when we look at a brother, instead of seeing a brother, you see an adversary. And when you look at somebody who will do you harm, who means do you harm, you don't see a person that will do you harm. You see a person that you could be your friend, could be your, uh, and they don't. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But again, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power. Because the Most High is yet gracious in every situation, in every circumstance, despite all these negative effects and these adverse situations. He's trying to get our attention so that we can put our focus on Him, because that's what He wants from us, is to put our focus on Him. Once we get that in our spirits, and we begin to walk in His ways and serve Him in spirit and in truth, then that will definitely help our situation, our circumstance, and things to get to normal for us. So we need to be thinking along that line and getting these things properly in line and in order. So we're going to go ahead and close out. Again, the reason we do these things, the reason we review these videos, is for our people. It's for Israel. And Romans chapter 10 and verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to the Father, Ha'abba, for Israel is that they may be saved. That's what we want. We want to see Israel saved. And in order for us to do this thing, in order for us to be saved, we have to understand Ecclesiastes 12 and 13. Let us hit the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged on whether we have feared the Most High and kept his commandments. Why? Because this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahoo, joined by my most esteemed Ak Akinanaya, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah, Bashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes of Israel, who were scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa, baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day that the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land, with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, shalom, family.
Shalom, Mishpachah.
All praises to the Abba, Barak